Hi guys. I wanted to start off with this chart that we were looking at yesterday at the end of the hour, just to review and remind you that again the top 1% making 18.7% of the money, paying 35.1% of the bill. What puts you in that top 1%, making $388,905 or more. So this kind of shows you, and these are just the facts you should understand when you're thinking about who pays what in taxes. Now, marginal tax rates is the percentage tax you're paying on each bulk of income. You'll pay 10% on the first $8,925 if you're single, 15% on the money $8,926 up to $36,250. And that continues up to the top marginal tax rate that we currently have is 39.6% for all income over $400,001 in the United States. So how we compute this is you start off with your income, you get some deductions and exemptions, which we'll talk about another time a little bit more in depth. So you're basing your tax off of $30,000 taxable income. Your first $8,925 will be taxed at 10%, and you subtract that $8,925 from the $30,000 that you were making. You're left with $21,075. You're going to pay 15% tax on that bulk of money. The total tax is your first $892 plus the $3161 for your total tax. Now the history, a little bit of history of the top marginal tax rates we've had in our country. It topped out in 1944 at 94%. The income range for that was, if you made over 200, you were paying 94% on that. So there really wasn't much of an incentive to make over $200,000. That is equivalent of $2.88 million today, so just understand that. And now we're at 39.6. Even when I was born, it was 70%. So basically, we've seen the top marginal tax rates come down quite a bit in the last 40 years. Now, it goes back to a little bit of understanding your economic freedom. Understand that we spend more on state and local federal taxes than we do on housing, clothing, and food combined. So it's a pretty big chunk of money that we do need to pay attention to. And again, politics is driving that decision making. Tax Freedom Day is a cool little invention from the Tax Foundation. They said, okay, what if we put all of the taxes that you have to pay, just front loaded it to the start of the year? So every dollar you make is going to go to taxes, and then when would your money all be yours? So basically you're working from January till about the middle to third week in April to pay all your different types of taxes. The federal income tax takes you 33 days, and then there's all the other taxes that go in there as well. We're not going to take the time to look at Piketty's wealth tax analysis. Basically says that it's not a good tax that he provided for in his book, trying to reduce income inequality in the world. So now we get into lump sum taxes, a red term here, basically the same for every person. So an example, this would be a tax of $4,000 per person. It would be a lump sum tax. So we have a chart here, whereas if your income's 20 grand, your average tax rate 20, marginal tax rate 0, $40,000 income, and so on. A lump sum tax is the most efficient tax because there's no deadweight loss. There's really not a big administrative burden because everybody knows what the tax is. Yet it's perceived as unfair. It's not politically popular. Everybody's got to pay the same. What about people who make different amounts of money, have different abilities to make money? That's the problem with it. So economically, it's the most efficient, but politically and things, it's looked at as the most unfair. Because again, the poor are paying as much as the rich in dollar terms, and relative to income, the poor are paying much more than the rich. They might be paying the same amount, but $4,000 out of your $20,000 income is 1/5 of your income. $4,000 of a $100,000 income is only 4% of your income. And so that would be called a regressive tax in that way. So taxes and equity. Basically, a goal of tax policy is to have equity or distributing the taxes fairly. Now, fairly is to be determined by whoever's in the eye of the beholder there. It's a little bit harder to agree on that. Now you could do it like the benefits principle. The benefits received principle is basically like a tax on a toll road. You received a benefit, you have to pay for it. It tries to make public goods similar to private goods. The more you use, the more you're going to pay. Like the roads with gasoline taxes. The amount of tax you pay is based upon how much gas you use. Likewise, if they made it into mileage on the road, it'd be the same thing. Now, the ability to pay principle is the idea that taxes should be levied higher onto people with more income. They can shoulder the burden, and so we could look at ability to pay principle like an income tax, where people are paying a higher percentage the more money that they make. Now, one thing we can look at with taxes is vertical equity, and I'll show you an example of this to make it a lot more sense in a second. But the idea that taxpayers with a greater ability to pay taxes should pay larger amounts. So basically, it's just if somebody has more money, they should be paying more in tax. So we'll look at three different tax systems. A proportional tax, which is everybody paying the same percentage. This is like our state income tax. Everybody pays like 4.25% to the state of Michigan on their income. A regressive tax is like our sales tax. It's 6% for everybody, but a poorer person is spending a much greater percentage of their money on stuff that gets sales taxed than a richer person. So a regressive tax, high income taxpayers pay a smaller fraction of their income than low income taxpayers. And a progressive tax is like our federal income tax, and a lot of states' income taxes are progressive as well, where people are paying a larger fraction when they make more money. They're paying a higher percentage. So there's a couple articles I wanted to look at briefly here. 2-cent tax on roads affects all pocketbooks equally was a quote from this article in the Free Press back in May, I believe it was. So it was talking about a possible 2-cent tax that we would put onto the sales tax. We'd have an 8% sales tax, and 2 cents of that would go to the roads. It might sound like a good idea. It definitely isn't that simple. They did say here, though, sales taxes would also hit every Michigan resident's pocketbook the same way. And that's not necessarily true. It says even though people who don't drive, they buy goods and services that use the roads to get them to market. The other issue is that some people spend 20% of their income on sales taxed items. Other people are only spending 10% of their income on sales taxed items. So the person who's buying more stuff that gets sales taxed, they're going to pay it at a higher percentage than everybody else. All right, and then this state and individual income tax rates has a lot of good information. Although it's not going to let us get there, I don't think, right now. I was just looking at this a minute ago. Maybe it will. Here we go. So this does show us that like a lot of different states do it differently. For instance, Alabama, they have a progressive taxation, 2%, 4%, 5%, the more money that you make. Alaska has progressive system. The greater percentage, the more money you make. So if you make over 150 in Alaska, you're going to pay 4.54% tax. And you can see a lot of states have this progressive tax system. Colorado is flat tax. It's 4.63% for everybody. And I'll show you Michigan here. Michigan is 4.25%. Massachusetts is 5.20%. But a lot of states have the progressive taxes. I scroll through here, you can see a lot of the blue and yellow. Right now, when I look at just Michigan taxes on this site, it'll give me some more information here that I want to share with you. We see our individual income tax, that flat income tax. There's a corporate income tax, sales and excise tax, and then average property tax. There's the tax freedom day arrives April 17th in Michigan, might arrive later in other states where they've got a higher tax burden. So the average, I thought this was kind of interesting, with sales and excise tax, Michigan state and local governments collect $959 per person in general sales taxes. And our gasoline tax is 39.1 cents per gallon. It's the 6th highest nationally. And our cigarette tax is $2. So excise taxes are typically like punishing for consuming something like cigarettes or alcohol or gasoline. So they're consumption taxes. All right, so examples of the progressive, regressive, and proportional taxes. Regressive here is a vertical tax for sure. You can see as you make more money, you're going to pay a higher amount in tax. Although it's regressive because you're paying a lower percentage of your income. So these people who make $200,000 are only paying 20% of their income toward, let's say, sales tax, versus somebody who makes 50 grand is paying 15% of their income toward sales tax. Proportional is the same percentage for everybody, 25% across the board. Progressive is just getting a larger percentage the more money you make. So the U.S. income tax is a progressive tax. So we've already gone through that. The idea of horizontal equity, the idea that taxpayers with similar attributes to pay taxes should pay the same amount. So the problem there, difficult to agree on what factors besides the income that might determine the ability to pay. So there's an active learning here on taxes and marriage. The income tax rate is 25%. The first $20,000 of income is excluded from taxation. Tax law treats a married couple as a single taxpayer. Sam and Diane each earn 50 grand. All right, so if Sam and Diane are living together unmarried, what is their combined tax bill? And obviously if they're married, it's going to be more. So if unmarried, they're each going to pay $7,500. As you can see the math there. So it'd be 15% of their joint income. Now if they're married, they're going to pay $20,000, and it's 20% of their joint income. So it's $20,000 together, but instead of $15,000 together. So that's kind of the marriage penalty or marriage tax that would exist in that system. So you have to be careful on how you're designing the system. And as part two, the income tax rate is 25%. Married couple exclusion is $40,000. Singles is $20,000. You've got Harry earning 0, Sally earning $100,000. What if they're unmarried? What if they are married? What is their tax bill? So if they're unmarried, Harry's not going to pay anything taxes. Sally will pay 20 grand. All right. Total taxes is 20% of their income. If they're married, now in this situation, it's only going to be $15,000 or 15% of their income based upon the criteria that we were given at the start. So this would be called a marriage subsidy, where the government's basically paying you to be married. There's a benefit of being married of $5,000 in tax treatment for that. So we don't need to talk about this slide anymore. This really was covered in the practice there. So basically we want a system where people are going to be paying the same tax. Two married couples with the same total income should pay the same tax. And the marital status should not affect a couple's tax bill. Family with no income would pay no taxes, and higher income taxpayers pay a higher fraction of their incomes than lower income taxpayers. But designing a tax system with all of those properties is mathematically impossible, okay? So who's going to bear the burden of a tax? It's going to be the person with more inelastic demand. So a tax on fur coats looks like it might be able to be passed on to people who are buying the fur coats, but it really is passed on to the people who supply the furs, who produce the furs. All right, so you have to be careful to take tax incidence into account when you're designing a tax system. And again, with corporate income tax, a corporation is really just like a person in the form of taxes. The tax burden is ultimately going to fall on the people. Suppose they levy a tax on automakers. The owner's going to receive less profit. It's going to shift wealth out of the automobile industry, and the supply of cars is going to fall then. Car prices are going to rise. Car buyers are worse off. So because of a tax on these corporations, we're paying more for cars, and that's not what we want. It's also going to cause wages to fall, and workers are worse off. So you've got to be very careful how you're designing a tax system. Flat tax is where everybody is paying the same marginal tax rate for all taxpayers. It's typically above a certain threshold, so if you're only making 20 grand, you're not going to be paying on that 20 grand, maybe all the money above 20 grand. It's very quick and easy. There's no loopholes, not as much of an administrative burden, but it's not popular from people who benefit from the current system, of course. So that is used in some places around the world. So understand that there's a lot of trade-offs with taxes and how they're designed, and you have to be very careful how you design that system, and we need to look at the economics of it to design the right system.